And welcome back into another episode of Tobacco Road and Abroad. My name's Garrett Parsons, joined by Aiden Moore. We may have a little bit of a shorter episode today just because we feel like there's not as much to talk about, and both of us have to be up either. Both of us have to be up early because Aiden's got to get to app and he's not feeling well, and I probably need to get some sleep after working 2 meet weekends in a row. But we're gonna jump right into it. We're gonna start with college football this week, just so we can get that out of the way because I don't know about you, Aiden, but I didn't really catch many of the NFL games last weekend. I was a little
Yeah,
preoccupied.
yeah. Pretty much with the NFL, the only thing that I have to say is Buffalo got the win over Kansas City, and the Chiefs are now no longer undefeated, and they're heading into Charlotte this week against the Panthers. So I'm excited for that game as a Panthers fan. I'm optimistic as a Panthers fan. I don't necessarily think there's going to be a big win for the Panthers, but I feel like anything can happen any given Sunday. I'm going to be rocking with the Panthers and hoping we can keep our little winning streak going. But jumping into college, North Carolina went up against Wake Forest this weekend, and Hampton had a huge week in production with rushing. He was able to rush for just under 250 yards, one touchdown. North Carolina's really UNC's really been utilizing him in a lot of assets of the game and just been really creating a solid run foundation. And that's also mixed well with Jacoby Christwell starting to kind of get into his own as a quarterback. Only one touchdown, 132 yards passing, but I liked his production throughout the game. He was doing relatively well. I like his ability to also extend plays and run. He had a rushing touchdown and a passing touchdown. So no real complaints for me on the offensive production of UNC. I feel like they've been doing good, and if we could tighten things up on defense a little bit, especially allowing 24 points from Wake Forest, not necessarily the best, but Wake Forest has a really tricky offense. Their slow run pass option has been tripping me up a little bit when watching them. So overall, I'd say solid win for UNC, and I look forward to watching them this week going up against Boston College.
Yeah, Wake Forest is always a tricky team to go up against, even when they're bad. They call it a slow mesh, even though the routes that the receivers are running aren't mesh. So I don't know why they call it slow mesh, but that's just what the media calls it. It's really kind of hard to stop it. I mean, I know teams have stopped it by essentially sending the house, but then what that leaves you up open to is that quarterback, instead of fully carrying out the slow mash, will pull the ball, and he basically has one-on-one shots with your outside corners, who, because they're sending the house, are having to bail, and they're not able to essentially get set playing coverage because their hips are obviously, if they're bailing, if for those who don't know, if corners are bailing, that means their hips are flipped around and they are running full speed back towards their own goal line, trying not to get beat. So that's never that slow mesh, like Aiden was saying, it kind of puts you in you're in a lose-lose situation. So elsewhere last week, we had some, I guess, big games. I mean, Clemson was able to pull it out against Pitt. I thought Pitt had that game kind of locked up, but then Cade Klubnik took off on a 50-yard run right before, or not right before the 2-minute warning. Excuse me, right after the 2-minute warning. Cade Klubnik took off on a 50-yard run to kind of seal it for Pitt. I kind of wanted to see more out of Pitt, but with Eli Holstein not playing that game, it was just, for not having your starter and your backup going for 34 for 54 for 350 yards. I don't think there's much more you can ask from your offense. I just think Clemson's kind of figured it out as of late. I mean, minus the Louisville game, but The ACC is just like a bloodbath right now. Everyone's taking down everyone. So the only one who's really kind of clear cut at the top right now is SMU, where everyone else is just kind of slaughtering each other. So that's that. Um,
Uh, Stanford taking down Louisville was a big upset in my book. I was really impressed by this Stanford performance, but I was very disappointed in Louisville and how I felt like they just gave the game away at the end. Uh, I think like on the last drive that Stanford was driving on, they gave up almost like 25 yards in penalties alone. That just put Stanford in a prime position to kick the game-winning field goal. So I was very disappointed in the lack of discipline on the Louisville defense, and I feel like that was the real nail in the coffin for them, causing them to lose to a Stanford team that's been very hit or miss, in my opinion. I mean, they've had a good win against, I believe, Syracuse and now Louisville, but overall, this has been a very rough year for the Stanford transition into the ACC. But win like this is always a good way to like end out a season on a positive note.
definitely, Stanford's a tricky team to play against. Their offense, they're similar to like a Wake Forest. They may not be the best team, but they've got these little wrinkles in their offense, either whether they be a wrinkle like a play call or like a personnel grouping that's really hard to deal with. Stanford, I know, runs a two quarterback system, but their wildcat quarterback, who's usually their short yardage guy, does have a pretty decent arm on him. So that adds just another layer of complexity that makes him that much harder to play against. So now, granted, I will say it was odd that Stanford got their first ACC win before a lot of ACC teams this year. They got their first ACC win before I believe State or Carolina. So
Yeah,
that was a rough one. I
yeah,
mean, granted, they did take advantage of a Syracuse offense that's very bipolar and is either on or they're throwing like 5 interceptions a game. So not exactly. Elsewhere in big news, Aiden and I predicted this one. Florida upsetting LSU. I don't think anyone's surprised. Um, I don't know what's your opinion on this as a Notre Dame fan, but from what I've seen, Notre Dame fans saying online, talking about the Brian Kelly slide. I don't know if this is a thing for him at Notre Dame where he'd slide towards the end of the season. I always thought you guys finished pretty strong in your seasons, but I just want to know what you think. Like,
from what I remember when like prime Brian Kelly years, his inability to really rally a team after like a big loss, it was something that I uh, thought about a lot. I believe it was 2015, like the infamous year. Notre Dame started off like 5-0. Then they lost one to FSU, and I believe they ended that season like 5-7. Like it was like just torrential downpour when it came to just like a nosedive of a season. Like they ended up like losing to a Northwestern team. They lost to USC. It was a really tough year with that like Everett Golson offense, Notre Dame team. I also think like actually no, that was 2014, I believe. So that year was 2014. 2015 they had a
I think
pretty
it's
solid year.
2016 actually, because
2016 2016
20
was 2016 was the year they went like no bowl game whatsoever, I think. The 2014 season where they played FSU, I think they actually did make a bowl game, if I'm not
yeah, I think
mistaken.
they went 8-5 that season.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, this is just kind of a trend I've seen with like some Brian Kelly teams where this one big loss tends to snowball into uh, more and more adversity for a team and just digging yourself a hole that's really hard to get out of.
Yeah, I know some LSU fans are already calling for his removal. I don't know how fast that's going to come with how much they're paying him and what the buyout would be, but that would be an expensive buyout. Elsewhere in big news, where else? There was one that you and I wanted to talk about. All right. Sorry, we're back after a little internet issue. Up next, we got Missouri and South Carolina. That game was a back and forth affair. South Carolina would go up with 5 minutes left. Then Missouri would come right back and they would score with a minute left. And then South Carolina would then drive the length of the field and score with 15 seconds left. It was just kind of an up and down game. People on both teams put up video game numbers. South Carolina quarterback Lenore Sellers went 21 of 30 for 353 yards and 5 touchdowns. Then the Missouri running back Nate Noel had 27 carries for 150 yards and a touchdown. Just kind of all around video game numbers. That definitely. I mean, Missouri wasn't in the playoff conversation, but now that Missouri has fallen and is 7-3, it is safe to say that they're safely out of the playoff. Like, because that, at least from what I've seen this season, 3 losses has been kind of like the benchmark for you're out of the playoff. Like, now I will say there is some talk that if Georgia picks up a third loss, they still would consider them because of strength of schedule. But I definitely think Missouri is safely out of the contention now, thanks to this loss.
Yeah, but I would like to say I think maybe South Carolina has also made a case for trying to sneak into the playoffs because if I'm going to be completely honest, like with South Carolina, I feel like with their schedule and just the way that they performed well against the Alabama team, they kind of had a pretty bad loss against Ole Miss, but not a horrible loss against LSU. I say you could make a case for South Carolina sneaking into the playoffs, especially if they win out against Wofford and Clemson. I see a world where if chaos ensues, a 3-loss South Carolina team definitely could make a case for the playoffs, but a lot of things would have to lie into place for that to play out. But moving on, I'd like to highlight some major Big 12 implications that have occurred this weekend. Arizona State dominates Kansas State in a pretty convincing fashion. Arizona State had a pretty dominant first half performance, and that was pretty much good enough to keep them over the edge against a late half try for a comeback against Kansas State. Overall, I'd say it was a very dominant win by Arizona State. Uh, Samuel Levitt for Arizona State had a very solid game, passing for 275 yards, 3 touchdowns. Really able to keep a dominant Arizona State offense on top. But Ashton Avery Johnson from Kansas State, really kind of struggled with 2 interceptions, and that kind of hindered some of the Kansas State production on offense, leading to a devastating loss for Kansas State. But yeah, you got any thoughts from that?
I do. With all the hype and hubbub, I heard like Avery Johnson is still a good quarterback, but from what I had heard, and this was not from Kansas State fans, this was like from the media. Like Kansas State fans honestly had no clue. Like, I mean, they knew this guy was like he was going to be something special last year playing as a true freshman, but I just think this Kansas State team, like they were a playoff contender, and they are like, I think they are handily out of playoff contention now. I mean, if their loss against BYU didn't like convince you enough, this Kansas State team has now lost to a pretty bad Houston team and has now lost to Arizona State at home, who are no slouch themselves, and honestly, in my opinion, deserve to be ranked and could be in the playoff conversation. because they've played two ranked teams this year so far, and they're 2-0. They beat Utah by 8, and I know Utah's shit, but at the time Utah was number 16, and they now beat Kansas State on the road. If they beat BYU at home, and then went out and beat Arizona in rivalry week, I think there's a distinct possibility where we could be having a conversation about Arizona State being in the playoff after a game like that against Kansas State. Because I thought this game, I mean, Kansas State did make kind of a comeback, but when I was looking at the score of this, I thought this game this game's over at halftime. And then when Arizona State came out and kicked a field goal to start the third quarter, I'm like, and it was 24-0 up until the end of the third quarter. I was like, this game's over. Like, that's like, they came out and jumped on them. So I don't know about you, but I think if Arizona State can play their cards right, and they need a little, not quite as much chaos as like a South Carolina, but if they get like, a little bit of magic going their way, they could very well end themselves up with a playoff spot in their first year in the Big 12.
Yeah, but just pivoting from that Kansas State game, I want to bring to play another Kansas team that actually had a good weekend, and that would be Kansas versus BYU. Kansas was able to pull off the upset against a undefeated BYU team, toppling what their once undefeated season. And I was very impressed by this Kansas performance, just showing how resilient they are. They really played some tough ball, tough defensive ball, that is. And they were able to grind out a touchdown in the fourth quarter just to edge them above BYU. And if I'm BYU, I'm very disappointed with this game. BYU was coming into this game, and it was like the notion by the media was a lot was very much, when was BYU going to slip up? There's been these heart attack moments if you're a BYU fan where you're just not very impressed by the quality of wins that they were having. They would always find a way to win, but they would always like leave you with like some cardiac Cougars moments, if you will. But it just seemed to all catch up with BYU this week. And if you're a BYU fan, you kind of got to understand now that you need to win out. The Big 12 is probably not going to get an at-large bid in the playoffs. So with just how up in the air everything is with the power structures of the Big 12, you got to wonder which team is going to be the one to like come away with the conference championship and the automatic bid into the tournament. And that's what I'm really excited to see in these next coming weeks. I'm still high on BYU, but I'm also high on Kansas. And if you're playing Kansas in these next couple weeks, you got to be on your major upset alert to make sure there's no slip ups in a time of the season where you can't afford slip ups.
Yeah, certainly down the stretch, slip ups affect you more, just because it's like basketball. The NCAA tournaments, who's like a lot of like the deciding factors is who's hot right now, and like a loss now means a loss now in conference play means a lot more than like a loss your initial game in conference play. That's just, unfortunately, that's just how it works in college football. There aren't as many games, so you don't have as many chances to prove yourself, and you also don't have as many chances. Like, you also don't have many second chances. If you lose, like, obviously this isn't the days of the BCS where you lose one and you're walking on eggshells. This is like, you can afford a loss or two here, but like, particularly in leagues like the Big 12, one or two losses could really be a detriment. And if enough chaos happens, the Big 12 champion may not even make it.
Mm.
There are doomsday scenarios that ESPN analysts have been working out, where there are scenarios based on the metrics where if enough chaos happens in the SEC these next 2 weeks, the SEC champion doesn't make it and will have to make it as an at-large. Or because if that's in a scenario where if Boise State wins out and just absolute chaos happens in the SEC. And the SEC championship games like 2-3 loss teams.
And then like Army would also probably have to win out, making the American Conference champion a higher seed than expected.
Yeah, because then in that case, there would be teams who'd be higher ranked than those who made this SEC championship game, and they would go because they'd have the higher ranking.
I see. I see.
Elsewhere, I'm trying to think of anything. I mean, I guess Navy continues their slide. I mean, after the Notre Dame game, they kind of I don't want to say giving up because that is one thing service academy teams don't do is that they do not give up. I didn't get a chance to watch it, but looking at the box score, Navy passed the ball a grand total of like 3 times, so that's why I don't see a quarterback. Tulane just kind of rolled on them. I just think this Navy team kind of needs. I mean, they're still a good team this season. I feel like. I mean, they have a chance to finish 8-4, upwards of 9-3, which is still a solid season for. I think any service academy, a 9-win season, something they don't see very often anymore. But I think this just goes to show that Tulane's not to be messed around with. This could very well, like if things go bad, this could be the Group of 5 playoff team. But it really kind of depends on what shakes out down the stretch. Trying to find out what else happened elsewhere, but this is
Tennessee, Georgia.
Tennessee, Georgia. Because I was about to say this is the one weekend. This is the 2 weekends in the season where SEC teams play fucking cannon fodder.
Yeah, well, Georgia was able to get a pretty solid win against Tennessee this week. That was a game that you and I were both pretty excited to watch. I'd say this game kind of lived up to expectations somewhat. I was a little bit disappointed in Tennessee's lack of production in the second half. I think that's where they really sold the game. I felt like they left a lot out on the field in that second half. But Georgia was able to clean up pretty good and come away with the win. And I'd say overall, if I'm a Georgia fan, I'm pretty happy. I think the Bulldogs are in a great spot to really capitalize and try to make that playoff push. But just with the amount of chaos that's going down in the SEC right now, it's really hard to really decipher who's the real top dog right now.
Yeah, that game was certainly interesting. At least with Tennessee from that perspective. Tennessee, they run, for those who don't know, they run supposedly, it's supposed to be like this really high flying offense called the veer and shoot. But how they've run it this year is they've started very like run heavy because you receive like it's really wide splits and it forces the defense to stretch it out. And I don't blame them. Take what the defense gives you. If they're giving you like wide open running lanes up the middle where Sampson can, as we've seen, rack up hundreds and hundreds of yards rushing over several weeks, like by all means take that. But at some point, like you're going to need the vertical capabilities of that offense that we saw 2 and 3 years ago, like when Tennessee first upset Alabama, I believe it was 2 seasons ago. You're going to need that. Like you're going to need the downfield ability of that offense, but that's just something we really haven't seen this year. Even in games where Tennessee has really excelled offensively, they really haven't had that many, deep shots, which is kind of what their entire when it comes to the passing phase, the veer and shoot, that's what the entire offense is predicated upon. Once you get to that second phase, it's down the field, deep shots. Yes, there are short RPOs, but a lot of their offense is predicated on down the field choice routes and deep shots, which they have just not. Teams have just kind of figured out how to stop that. They've found out that if they just disrupt the timing of the route, that they can really affect Tennessee. And I think we saw that against Georgia. I mean, they were able to connect on some deep shots, but it was just Tennessee did go fast, and it did look they had Georgia's number at certain points in that game. But this is just there was nothing really explosive about that Tennessee offense, and that's to keep pace with Georgia at Georgia, that's just something they were going to need to have in order to get them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anywhere else? I'm trying to see. The only other, I'm trying to look at what games. There weren't that many absolute barn burners this weekend. I mean, Boise State continues to win. I thought there for a second that San Jose State had them.
Yeah, that
Like
was a
Ashton Genty had like 30 yards on like 10 carries. It wasn't looking too good. And then Ashton Genty exploded in the second half and finished with 32 carries for 160 yards and 3 touchdowns. I thought they had them dead to rights, but then Boise State would go on to score 30. Not sorry, excuse me. Boise State went on to score 28 unanswered points after San Jose State opened the third quarter with a touchdown.
yeah,
Like, they didn't even start passing the ball. Ashton Genty just said, "Fine, I'll do it myself."
yeah,
And that's not to say San Jose State played a bad game. I mean, their quarterback had video game numbers. He had 450 passing yards, 3 touchdowns. Did have 2 interceptions. They had a receiver with 10 receptions for 172 yards and a touchdown. I mean, San Jose State did all they could. I think it was just it's that 3 yards in a cloud of dust philosophy. If we keep running the ball onto the line, we'll rip one off in the second half, and that's just what started happening. Was they
yeah,
just started ripping off long runs.
yeah.
But the only other interesting game from that week is Oregon, Wisconsin. Wisconsin almost got them. Wisconsin had a chance to win, but they I guess you could say, let Oregon back in the game. It was a 7-point game. But then on the final drive, Locke, the quarterback for Wisconsin, did throw a costly pick six, kind of a bonehead read. But, he was not the starter this year, and it was a high pressure situation. Excuse me. It's not even that late for us. I don't know why I'm yawning, but what we found, usually backups in high pressure situations are a little more prone to interceptions, especially when you have to be in that 2-minute offense, that hurry up offense where you can't really stop, catch your breath, everything. You're kind of just running on adrenaline. And in those times, from what I've seen, it appears the easiest to make bad reads. So that's all I'll say on that game. Would you like to jump to this week?
Yeah, yeah. A lot of
Um,
good games this week that I'm pretty excited about. Just want to give a quick shout out to the UNC Boston College game this week. I'm pretty high on UNC lately, but if I'm going to be completely honest, I'm not as confident in them finishing strong in these last 2 games as most fans are. I feel like this is going to be a really tough last 2 games for UNC. Boston College and State are both really strong football teams that are at the level of UNC, but they're very desperate for wins right now. And I feel like UNC can definitely fall into the trap of being complacent and allowing to slip these next 2 games. So if I'm UNC, I'm really emphasizing heavy on the run, making sure that Jacoby Criswell has enough room passing and opening up the play action so he can probably make some magic happen, throw some more touchdowns, and really improvise what he's been shown to that he's really good at. And I want to emphasize the strengths of the UNC offense and really trying to finish the season strong. I want to see UNC take Boston College to the limit, and I want to see a dominant win against State. But that's me getting ahead of myself. 12 o'clock, sending your ass to the Arrowverse. Big CW kickoff, Boston College, UNC. It's going to be a good game. It's going to be a good game. I'm excited for it. But moving into more important games with playoff implications, Gareth, there's a lot of strong games this week. Do you want to start off with a big noon kickoff, Indiana versus Ohio State?
yeah, I think this is the game that I feel like it's got. I don't think that it does have big playoff implications. I think based on the kind of rhetoric that's going around, I think the loser may be out regardless of who the loser is. I know there's a lot of talk that if Indiana loses this, even in like convincing fashion, like they take Ohio State to the rim, they push and push and push, but then they ultimately come up just short. There's talk that Indiana is out of the playoffs, but in my mind, if we have that line of logic, Ohio State's already dropped a game, and with how strong the SEC's looked this year, I mean, granted, I don't know how strong it's looked. They've murdered each other, but that's kind of what the ACC's been doing too. But at what point is Ohio State out of contention as well? Like with this, like if they lose to Indiana at home, I'd say they're out because they've got Michigan, and Michigan's sitting at 5-5. A home win against Michigan, like I don't care if they hang 90 on them. If you lose to Indiana at home here, I think Indiana takes the spot for the playoff spot for the Big Ten. Now, Ohio State could get an at-large bid, definitely. But I think now, in terms of the game, I think it's going to be a close one. I do think Ohio State will come away with it. Not to say that I don't have faith in Indiana. I do see a world in which Indiana wins because Ohio State has come off slow against certain teams, but Indiana is a team like they're an older team, they're experienced, they can hurt you, they know when to they're really good at capitalizing off of mistakes. And if Ohio State gets similar to the Nebraska game or like other games this season where it was closer than it should have been, if Ohio State gets kind of lulled into a false sense of security like they get against Nebraska, and I think this team's better than I think this Indiana team's definitely better than Nebraska. Like, I mean, they're ranked number 5, but Ohio State cannot come out like they did against Nebraska. If they do that, I think Indiana will jump out on them, and Ohio State in that scenario would make it close. But I think if Ohio State's going to win, they're going to have to come out fast, and they're going to have to come out fast and heavy.
Absolutely, but I feel like Ohio State's definitely pretty hungry going into this game. They know that teams have been looking for them to slip up ever since like Nebraska. Media was saying if there's going to be a year where Penn State can beat Ohio State, it was going to be this year. Ohio State was able to take care of Penn State, take care of business. I feel like I see a lot of that going into this game. I feel like we're going to see a lot of what happened in the Penn State game in this game. I feel like Indiana's going to keep it close. They're going to have at times we're going to think that Indiana's going to have Ohio State's number, but Ohio State's going to come out fast and strong, and they're going to take care of business. I got Ohio State in this game.
Yeah. Elsewhere this weekend, there's another big game with playoff implications where I do think, in fact, that just because of these two teams' conference situations, that the loser may be out of playoff contention is Army Notre Dame, which is taking place in New York City this weekend.
In the Bronx, in Yankee Stadium, 7:30 kickoff, I believe.
Yep, this is a big one. I know some of my swimmers are actually going to this game, so they're excited about that. This one, I do think Army will give Notre Dame a bit bigger of a run for their money. The main divider in that previous game was just Navy turning the ball over 7 times. You don't want, especially Navy's offense isn't meant to come from behind, and no one wins giving up 7 turnovers unless you're playing a video game. But no one can especially win giving up 7 turnovers and running the option. That's not a recipe for success. Like that's like putting metal in a microwave and expecting something good to happen. That's just like you can't turn the ball over 7 times. Now, do I think this Army team is going to knock off Notre Dame? No. I think it's going to be a bit closer because Army does do a better job of taking care of the ball, in my opinion. But who knows? I mean, anything can happen. I mean, some of the stuff I've seen on Instagram is someone's drunken grandpa was posting about the Army quarterback, Bryson Daly, who, in my opinion, I don't think should win the Heisman. I just think I want to see him on the ballot. Dude doesn't even have to make top 5. I just think with the numbers that he's been putting up this season, he deserves to be up there. But this is what this drunk uncle's been tweeting about him. Not my drunk uncle, but this is what people are calling him drunk uncle in the comments. One of the gnarliest players in college football, glass eater, not going to be intimidated. His neck joint goes from his ears to his AC joint. He runs into darkness. But now, what do you think about this game?
I'm very excited for this game. I expect Notre Dame to come away with it, but I expect a hell of a fight from Army. And the Shamrock Series has always produced some strong games. I believe this is a Shamrock Series game. I assume just because it's like neutral site and it's considered a Notre Dame home game. But actually, yeah, it is. I checked. It is. Should be a one hell of a game. Notre Dame has yet to lose a Shamrock Series game where they played at a neutral site with their special uniform. So I got Notre Dame winning this one. I think it's going to be a dogfight, but I got Notre Dame just having the stronger manpower to overcome Army.
And they've got some interesting uniforms for this game. That's not their normal blue, is it? That looks almost like a denim blue. Or is that gray?
It's like a Gotham. They say it's like Gotham blue or Gotham gray or something like that.
Sounds like that almost looks like it's meant to be faux denim, and I'm like, teams that have worn faux denim looking jerseys in the past have had some success, namely the U.S. men's national team in 1994 when they wore jerseys that were meant to look like jean jackets. They're ugly. Don't look them up. They're ugly. Do I have one hanging in my closet? No, but they're ugly. I do have one in my closet. They may make an appearance when we talk about the U.S. men's national team another day. Elsewhere this week, there's a few big games, and ESPN won't load, so that's great. Took my phone off of the Wi-Fi because StreamYard was struggling. So, there is, I guess, how do I put this? There's always the off chance. I will highlight this game just because it's an SEC rivalry. There is always the off chance that in the swamp, Florida jumps up and gets Ole Miss. That would be the thing to happen after Ole Miss destroying Georgia. That would be the thing to happen. DJ Lagway and the Gators, Mississippi State, they don't really have a hard game left on their schedule, technically speaking. They've got Florida and then they've got Mississippi State. 2-8 Mississippi State, the best 2-8 team in the nation. I'm just saying they've had a bunch of one-score losses, some highly ranked teams. So if Ole Miss isn't careful, that could be a big one. But I don't think Florida will win this game, but I think they may give Ole Miss a scare with this game being in the swamp. I mean, Florida's shown that they haven't given up on their season yet. I mean, this was a Florida team that people thought was going to go like 1-11. They thought they were only going to beat Samford.
Yeah.
And that they were going to lose out, but this Florida team has showed fight. I mean, they got blown up by Miami. People were freaking out. They kept it somewhat close to Texas A&M. They beat Mississippi State, beat UCF, kept it really close with Tennessee. They beat Kentucky handily. They somewhat hung with Georgia for most of the game. I mean, then they got blown out by Texas at Texas, but after hanging with Georgia for the majority of the game and then you play Texas a week later, I don't think you're going to – that's not a recipe for success. But then Florida turns around with a home win against number 22 LSU, and now they'll have a home game against number 9 Ole Miss. I think this could be a tough game for Ole Miss. I think it'll be a scare. I think it'll be a back-and-forth affair, but I do think Ole Miss will come out on top. What about you?
I feel about the same. I feel like it's going to be a close affair. I feel like Florida is going to give everything that they have in these last couple games, and I think they're going to be closing out conference play with an absolute bang. I like Ole Miss in this one just because I feel like they've been really dominant these past couple games, and they've really tried to been uh, fulfilling the memo of we got to win out. But I don't see Ole Miss taking Florida lightly, and I see them coming away with this one.
Yeah,
But
and
yeah, you were
only
saying.
other ranked matchup this week between two ranked teams is BYU Arizona. Aiden, I've kind of alluded to this. Um, I feel like this is a play-in for the playoff game right here. I mean, obviously, the winner will likely go to the Big 12 championship, assuming Iowa State doesn't have a tiebreaker with Arizona State. Because then, if that happens, Arizona State beats BYU, the championship game would be Colorado Arizona State. Which now Colorado could very well be a playoff team. They're high flying. They're 8-2. I mean, granted that's if BYU loses, but looking at this game and just BYU's kind of looked stoppable so far lately, and I just think that particularly with this being an Arizona State home game, and Aiden and I kind of alluded to this for the Kansas State game, with how dangerous that Arizona State run game is in tandem with their passing game, with their quarterback who Sam Levitt, he doesn't have stellar numbers, but 17 touchdown to 4 interception 17 touchdown to 4 interception ratio is not bad at all. Like that, I'd say that's damn good. So I think that's just kind of a dangerous combo. And with how kind of I don't want to say BYU's been playing apathetic because they've been they've been fighting, but I just think they're playing ineffectively and like they're not really moving the ball very well. It's not that they don't care. I just feel like they don't really move the ball well like they have in the past. I think they've kind of hit a dry spell with their offense. And I think if that dry spell continues against Arizona State, they could really be in trouble. But even if BYU's on, I have Arizona State in this game. I mean, it's a home game for them. That rushing attack is just, I think it'll be too much.
Yeah, same. I got Arizona State in this game. I think their offense has just been too hot lately and I don't think BYU really has an answer for them. I feel like this is has the potential for a shootout, but I just don't see BYU's offense keeping up with just how dominant Arizona State has been lately. I got Arizona State winning this game, and that kind of brings me into another Big 12 game with major implications. Colorado's got to find a way to win against Kansas. I know Colorado's the favorite here, but Kansas has been on a lot of people's radars lately, and Colorado's only favored by 3 points. This is in Arrowhead Stadium. It's a Kansas home game. I don't think Kansas has what it takes to win this one, but I just want to say that I think Colorado definitely better be on upset alert on this week.
Yeah, I do think Colorado does get business done here, but with just the hot streak that Kansas is on, that's something you can't ignore. I don't think Kansas will win, but I do think Kansas could make it uncomfortable for Colorado, especially with how hot they're playing. I do think they'll make it interesting, especially with them still fighting to be bowl eligible. I think this will definitely be a dogfight, and I think Kansas is going to fight down towards the wire. Let me think. Is there any other games you'd like to bring up? I may talk about the state game in a second, but just
I
trying to
can't
see if
think.
there's some. You can't think of anything.
Yeah.
Um, there's one other game that's somewhat interesting. Neither team is ranked, but they do have surprisingly good records for who they are. This weekend we've got a revival of a old Big East matchup. We've got 7-3 UConn versus 7-3 Syracuse. UConn definitely having a lot better season than they anticipated. That money that they pulled from the men's swim team at UConn's finally being put to good use. But then again, UConn hasn't fucking played anyone this year. The Power 5 teams UConn's played, they've gone 0-4. So, and some of them have not been close. So, if I'm being completely honest, I think Syracuse takes this one here. I know they've had a tendency to fall flat, and Kyle McCord can double his interception ratio on a given day. But I think Syracuse is going to beat the shit out of UConn. Like it's not even be close. I mean, I watched this UConn team play a year ago, and their leading receiver from that team is now on NC State. So I don't really see much going right in this game. I realize that's kind of like a one-off acknowledgement. I just figured since we do talk about Big East basketball, I'd highlight a former Big East rivalry, but um, not much to say for me about this game. But if you have anything to add, Aiden, feel free. But it's up to you. I know this was just kind of like an awkward mention, but I was just like, oh, former Big East rivalry. Figured I should drop that in there.
I mean, I might pay attention to it. I think it's going to be a fun little matchup. I got Syracuse winning this one, but Syracuse has been very bipolar, and if UConn can string together a couple of good drives, I definitely see the world where they could probably take this game. But I just think, even though the woes of Syracuse, their lows have been lows, I feel like their highs are too high for UConn to really take this one. So I got Syracuse taking this one.
Yeah, I do too. I guess I'll talk about the state game now. So as of right now, the NC State game probably finished about 2 hours ago. I will say that was kind of devastating to watch. Um, the defense really did all they could that game. Um, I don't think Georgia Tech even cracked 100 yards rushing. Excuse me, they got 119, but that's the majority of that came on their final drive where their quarterback was scrambling. But I'm not going to touch on that much. We really shouldn't have been in that position. The offense really kind of left the defense out to dry there. And I know that pick six on the first drive was unlucky. Like the chances of watching a jet sweep get intercepted are slim to none, but they're never zero. But that pop pass, Casey just bobbled it, and they took it the other way. We also can't have a game where the offense doesn't do anything for 2 quarters in a row. I think that kind of did us in. I mean, yeah, it was great. The offense scored 22 points in the fourth quarter. That's awesome. And then our quarterback had 90 yards rushing for 3 touchdowns. And we had overall, I think, almost 300 yards on the ground that game and still fucking lost, which I think that's even crazier that we almost had 300 on the ground and still lost. But our defense did its job. They held that Georgia Tech offense. They held one of the ACC's leading rushers who was trying to keep pace with Hampton, but I think with tonight, Hampton gets as mathematically claim the crown for ACC top rusher, unless Jamal Haynes like puts up like 400 yards against Georgia, but that's not going to happen. Jamal Haynes is he's been knocked off kind of where he was slated to go, but this game brings up a larger issue for me. I've said it on Twitter a few times. I just think the coaching staff kind of feels apathetic at this point. I mean, I don't want to say they don't care because Dave Doran looked like he was about to cry in the press conference, but I definitely think the offensive coordinator just does not care. I mean, this is the same issue I've had with Tim Beck. It's not the playbook itself. It's like what plays they're calling when. Like, yeah, Robert and I has some creative play call, but he only whips it out when his job's on the fucking line. Like, when we hadn't done anything all game, he decides to be an offensive genius when, like, it's like last possible second. We saw this with Tim Beck. There was one game when I think of the similarities between Tim Beck and Robert and I is the Wake Forest game in 2021. Wake Forest was ranked number 14. We went into BB&T Field. We were scoring slug for slug with Wake Forest, and there were several 4th and inches, like, 3rd and shorts where I didn't think the play call was great. I mean, obviously there were some 4th and inches we didn't go for in that Wake Forest game. And there's some like 3rd down and shorts where it was like we threw some screen pass instead of just trying to run the ball. And Oddly enough, that's some of the play call I'm pissed about tonight. We ran a grand total of 6 screen passes for an average gain of -6. So I'm not going to touch any more on specific play calls, but it's just all just very broad brushstrokes here. I get you don't want to give up on certain elements of your game plan. I know not a big part, but I know a decent, I guess a good, not a good chunk, but like a healthy amount of Robert and I's offense comes from not a lot of screens, but like some of it comes from like very well placed screens. But I just think with how he calls screens, it's like putting your hand on a hot stove. Like nothing's gonna change. Like unless you turn the stove off, like nothing's gonna change. You're gonna keep burning yourself. I will say I will give credit where credit is due. Our running game has kind of taken off in the last couple weeks. It's been better, but I will say the play call just hasn't been there. For being in year 12, I think this is kind of piss poor from Dave Doran that our ceiling is 6-6 for this season. Like that's just for year 12 and for what he's supposed to accomplish and what he says he can accomplish. And other people have heard me say it. I don't know if this will end up as some stupid TikTok clip I do for like clickbait or whatever. But for a 12-year coach, he sure as hell uses the excuse of getting out coached a lot. You think with being at a program and in a conference for 12 years, and yes, you've got conference realignment and whatever, and ACC's at 17 teams, which is, I think, almost sacrilegious at this point for a conference. But the amount of times Dave has said he's been out coached over the years, it's been like, if you're being out coached this much, should you maybe go back to the drawing board? And I think that's another one of those moments tonight was the clock management from NC State. Even after the defense gave up that scramble with 16 seconds left, NC State yet again had a chance to win it. NC State went 40 yards in one play, got in field goal range, and Dave Doran had a choice to make. They didn't need to. Dave Doran took a timeout with 5 seconds left. Instead of trying to run another play to get, another 4, 5, 6 yards, just like a quick out, they decided to call a timeout and kick the ball. And then in the press conference, he decided to say, he was like, I think it's poor timekeepingsmanship on the officials because he's like, when I called that timeout, he's like, the ACC officiating crew decided to review how much time was actually on the clock. And he's like, they came over and let me know there was 6 seconds. And he's like, had I known that, I wouldn't have used my timeout. But if I'm being honest, 5 seconds is enough for a quick out, timeout or no timeout. I mean, one thing I think back to is Clemson, Alabama in 2016, where they ran that goal line rub route with 4 seconds left, and it was essentially a 6-yard out. They had 5 seconds left. 4 seconds came off the clock. And unlike Clemson, we were on the right hash. The way we needed to go to essentially minimize the distance to the sideline and the distance that we needed to throw the ball, we were on the correct hash. So even less time would have come off that clock. It's just the horrible clock. You think with how much experience, not only that Dave's had prior, but the experience he's had in his 12 years at NC State, you'd think there would have been a bit better clock management out of that to go, hey, let's roll the dice here. Like, 58-yard field goal, he had the distance and just barely missed. So, that was close for 58 yards and how that win was thrown. I don't blame the kicker, Noah Collins. That was the best effort we were going to get out of him. But it's just the coaching and the decisions that I've seen made this season. Not the game plans, it's just the adjustments. Dave Doran makes adjustments way too late, in my opinion. So do the offensive coordinators. And I feel like this has just been the story of NC State post, after Elijah Drinkwitz left to go take the job at App State, now the head coach at Mizzou. there just hasn't been the same bite to the offense. Like that NC State offense under Elijah Drinkwitz, yes, they were like conservative, and I know Dave Dorn's thing is conservativeness, but the thing is, we had a run game we could fall back upon. And once we beat up the other team's O-line, we'd throw caution to the wind, and we became an air raid style team once we set up that run game. But the thing is, I don't think this NC State team really has an identity right now. We kind of go with whatever works. And I know that that's kind of a good way to play football games where, like, say you're an air raid team, but the run's working, you run the ball. But when there's no game plan to begin with, like there's no like go-to bread and butter, like it's not even that we're a balanced team either where we have a 50-50, kind of spread of plays. It's just we go into a game not knowing what's going to work. Like that's just at the very least, I think this needs to be Robert and I's last year. Like that the experiments, like, he's pulled a Kevin Keats is what he does. Robert and I, like, he pulls the aggressive play calls out when his ass is on the line, when his job's on the line. And no shade to Kevin Keats. I think everyone was too quick to jump on firing him, but I think Robert and I at least needs to go. If not Dave Dorn, but I know for a fact that we are not going to get rid of him. But unlike other online trolls, I'm going to provide a solution. Joel Gordon, USF offensive coordinator. I think this is the direction we need to go in. Yes, USF's offense has been kind of hot and cold this season, but they also have, like, they're an American team. They don't have the same recruiting. They don't have the same players. I like his style of offense, that veer and shoot style offense. Now you're saying, well, why don't you go get one of, like, the masses, the veer and shoot? Like, go get Josh Heupel's offensive coordinator. Go get Lane Kiffin's. They're not going to come to NC State unless we give him the head coaching job. Like, that's just in my dream world. We take Ole Miss's offensive coordinator as our head coach, but knowing this department, we're not getting rid of Doran. So you have to offer reasonable solutions, and I think with the players we have and CJ Bailey's deep ball, I think we need to be running a Tennessee-style veer and shoot, and that's essentially what USF runs. And I think we need to, at the end of the season, see what we can do if we get rid of Robert and I. So I'll have a more coherent NC State rant at the end of the season, but I think that'll do it for my state rant. Mm-hmm. Any other games you want to touch on? Or
no, I'm good.
Okay. I think that'll do it for our college football one. Aiden's going to hop off because he's got somewhere to be. I may carry on with a little bit of soccer, but not for much longer. So thank you for joining us today, Aiden. It's great talking to you.
Of course. Sorry I have to go, but I love all of y'all, and I'll be back next week, ready for the Thanksgiving special. So I'm ready for that. Yeah. And NC State, UNC coming up on the horizon. I'm excited to make predictions for that, and should be a fun episode next week. So I can't wait for that. But
and you know what? They've surprised us. It's not on the CW. It's at 3:30.
Ooh, nice.
Which I feel like is kind of bipolar. I feel like the State Carolina game is either noon or it's 8 o'clock. But this time it's at 3:30.
3:30. So. Anyway, I'm signing off. Great talking to all of you. Yeah.
Hello, and we are back. Unfortunately, Aiden did have to jump off, and since I didn't want to do the NFL section without him, we really don't have much to say about this week minus the Chiefs Panthers game. What I will say about that game is I think this could be a good game for the Panthers to kind of, set the tone for the rest of the season. I mean, mathematically speaking, the Panthers still can get the number one overall seed in the NFC. Yes, at 3-7. If the Panthers went out and some other little magic happens, the Panthers can get the number one overall seed. I don't think that's what's going to happen, but the Panthers can still make the playoffs. And based on how the other NFC South teams are playing. That's a distinct possibility, but the Panthers would have to win out. So I don't know. But from there, we'll jump into some soccer. I mean, as I mentioned earlier when we were talking about Notre Dame's jerseys, the aforementioned jean-looking jerseys, the denim jerseys. That's what I have one right here, the U.S. 1994 jersey that's meant to look like denim. I think it's so hideous that it's actually a cool jersey. Like it starts going back the other way on the spectrum, but who knows? I mean, I know some people aren't fans of these, but I think this jersey is a classic, the denim jerseys. So I'll highlight what's going on in the Nations League, at least for the U.S. men's national team. The U.S. men's national team's coming off of a nice win over Jamaica. This is the first time we really got to see what Pochettino was really going to do with his just kind of, how he was going to be with the team, because the first stint in the international break, Pochettino really only had that team for practice for 3 days. So there was limited install he could do. He couldn't really implement his system too terribly well. But this break, we got to see that. We finally got to see what a glimpse of what the U.S. might look like under Pochettino. Still not all the way there. Like, he still only had 6 days with the team. So who knows? And even in the early international break last time, he sent a lot of those players back. So I don't know. But we'll just highlight the first and second leg here of the U.S. game. The first leg of the U.S. game, they played Jamaica. And the first leg, there was a 2-legged tie where the winner on aggregate would go through. The U.S. won the first leg, 1-0. I know a lot of U.S. fans are really upset about this result and saying, oh, we're trash and we suck. But in this game, Jamaica just kind of sat back in a low block and just defended the entire time. The U.S. got a lucky break 5 minutes in when Ricardo Pepi was able to notch one home. But other than that, it was just kind of the U.S. dominated possession 60-40. I mean, they led shots on target. They led big chances. They led accurate passes with 417. Like, it was Jamaica outshot the U.S., but they weren't on target. It was just kind of that where it was, the U.S. was dominating possession. It was just kind of a lot of chaotic stuff from Jamaica. Now, the second leg's where things really took off. This second leg was played in the U.S. And the U.S., they just kind of took off this game. It was all gas, no breaks from the get-go. The U.S. won 4-2, meaning they won 5-2 overall on aggregate. Man of the match they have is Timothy Weah. Which, honestly, in my opinion, man of the match would go to Christian Pulisic. He had a brace, but it was taken away from him and ruled that the Jamaican defender, Deshaun Bernard, the ball did take a glancing blow off of him on Pulisic's second goal, so he was robbed of a brace. But overall, I think that second leg was a lot more of what we're going to see from Pochettino. U.S. almost had a staggering amount of possession. They led possession 70-30, 16 total shots, 6 shots on target, 3 big chances, 640 accurate passes. It was just total domination by the U.S. 691 total passes with 330 in the opposing half, with Jamaica only having 80 passes in the U.S. half. 27 accurate long balls, which is 73% conversion. Like, the U.S. was just all over. The U.S. looked like a Premier League team, in my opinion. And I'm a big soccer tactics guy, and what I saw this game, I kind of liked. The U.S. How do I say this? The U.S. came out in that classic Pochettino 4-2-3-1, but in build-up, it was actually quite interesting what the U.S. did. The U.S., like I said, came out of 4-2-3-1, but from what I've seen in build-up, that back four will become a back three, and depending on which side the U.S. are building up, the opposing side fullback. So say the U.S. is building up the left. Robinson would slide up into the midfield, and it would kind of create a 3-4-3 look. Pulisic and Weah would push up near Ricardo Pepi, and that's kind of the wings. Musa, McKennie, and Tessman, and would kind of tuck into that midfield with Robinson, who is then pushed forward to be the support on the left. Scally and the rest of the back line would shift over and form a back three of Reem, Mark McKenzie, and Joe Scally. and depending on what side they built up, usually they built up the left through Anthony Robinson, who is more of the attacking fullback out of the pair, but Joe Scally still can be viable bringing it up the right. But we've very much just, it looked like just kind of almost like a Premier League team, like in the way we built up. There was possession, there was nice long balls, there was switches. We held the ball in there, and we made great stops on defense. It's just, we looked like a well-oiled machine, and that's not something I've seen from a U.S. team in a while, quite frankly, ever. But, excuse me, sorry. We didn't go as late as normal, but still, I mean, the U.S. looks great. I mean, that long ball for the opening goal from Weston McKennie to Christian Pulisic, that looked like Premier League soccer right there, that long ball. Although, granted, it was pretty windy in City Park in St. Louis. So, from what the commentator said, while that long ball was pretty, the ball did get kind of stuck up in the wind and kind of swirl around. That caused the keeper to misjudge it. And they're like, under normal circumstances, they think the keeper would have gotten to it. But based off where it was headed, I disagree with that. But, that's why I'm on here on a podcast and not in the booth in Missouri. So, elsewhere, I guess we'll highlight some Premier League stuff. One thing I'd like to highlight is obviously my team, Chelsea, sitting in third, doing pretty well. I mean, there's been some games I've been frustrated with. Primarily, that Liverpool game. That was the game I feel like, not that Chelsea should have won, but a game that Chelsea could have pulled it out. Granted, it's a rivalry match. It's at Anfield. It was a 2-1 loss, so not completely embarrassing. The U.S., Salah had Liverpool take the early lead, then Chelsea equalized with Jackson, and then finally Jones put it away. But recently, Chelsea, I feel like they've been on a relatively good streak. Chelsea did just tie with Arsenal at Stamford Bridge. Really wish Chelsea would have been able to pull that out, but unfortunately they were not. I mean, Arsenal is one of the top teams in the Premier League right now. Chelsea is not tied with them, but they're tied on points. Chelsea having the edge on goal difference. Usually in those home legs of rivalry, derbies, or if you will, you'd like to see a win in those, because playing on the road in the Premier League is quite difficult. Upcoming tomorrow as in Saturday, that's right now, it's 2:00 on Friday morning. Chelsea will take on Leicester City. I think Chelsea have got this one in the bag. Leicester City have been kind of below their usual form this year. Leicester City only with 2 wins, 4 draws, and 5 losses. Goal difference is -7. It's not the Leicester City team of old that we know. I mean, this Leicester City team is a shell of that team that won the Premier League 8 years ago this year. But you never know. Anyone can win in the Premier League on any day. This game is I do believe this game is at King Power Stadium. So, a little bit of a home field advantage there for Leicester City. Chelsea on the whole, I feel like, has been having a good season. We are obviously sitting third, which is, we haven't been that high in a while. Chelsea scoring, 17 goals in the Premier League this season, 21 goals in the Premier League off of 19 expected, which is, for those of you who don't know, is for every shot, there's a rating of an expected goal, which is essentially, if you were to shoot from that spot on the soccer field, what's the chances of it going in? And it's based off of a whole lot of factors, like where the goalkeeper is, where the other defenders in the field is. It's this whole complex equation. I've seen the math, and it's horrendous. I would not want to be the people. I mean, they have computers that do it, but I would not have wanted to be the person that came up with that. But 21 goals on 19.9 expected, that is not bad at all. I think that's very good for Chelsea. I mean, last season, our expected goals is pretty low, but also our offense struggled. So, our offense struggled in the first half, but then the second half, it was our defense that struggled last season. In terms of this season, Chelsea is one of the top offenses in the Premier League. Chelsea is tied for fourth in the most goals scored. Tottenham leads the league with 23 goals. Brentford and Manchester City both have 22 goals scored. Chelsea tied on 21 with Liverpool, with averaging 1.9 goals a game, which in the Premier League is not too shabby. just kind of a general glance at the Premier League table. Obviously, in first is Liverpool. Second, only 4 points clear of Chelsea's Man City. Third is Chelsea. Fourth is Arsenal. Fifth is a sleeping giant who I'd like to talk more about them in the future. But the sleeping giant that is Nottingham Forest. Nottingham Forest, for those of you who don't know, Nottingham Forest is one of the. When I say this, I'd like people to have some understanding with this. Nottingham Forest is one of the perennial powers in top flight English football. And what I mean by top flight is the top level of professional soccer in England. And the reason why I call it top flight is the top flight wasn't called the Premier League until 1992. So technically, Nottingham Forest does not have any Premier League titles, if I am correct. Yeah, Tottenham, they are. They don't have any Premier League titles per se, but they have a league title for the top flight in 1977, but they were runners up in 78 and 66. They've won the Champions League twice, which is a lot more than most teams in England. That's what I mean by they're kind of a perennial power in the Premier League. They are former European giants, a sleeping giant, if you will. They've won the EFL Cup 4 times. They won the UEFA Super Cup once. They've been a runner-up once. They've won the FA Cup twice, which is a lot more than most teams. So they have a history of success, and it's kind of nice seeing Nottingham Forest get back up to that level because it's they kind of were in some dire straits there for a few years, just with their average finishes and just kind of. It's nice to see them back. I mean, they have been back in the Premier League, but it's been nice to see them. For the longest time, they bounced around the championship until they finally broke back into the Premier League in 2022, 2023. From there, I mean, elsewhere in the Premier League, I mean, looking at the table, Brighton in 7th, Brighton in 6th, Fulham in 7th. Tottenham in 10th. It is odd seeing the two top scoring teams in the Premier League sitting at 10th and 11th, and Tottenham and Brentford. Bournemouth sitting around 12th. That's nothing new for them. Man United sitting in 13th after a little slow start to the season, but I do think they'll recover. West Ham, who had a good season last year, or not a good season last year. They had some better seasons than in the past couple of years, finishing 9th last year, but they've fallen to 14th. Leicester at 15th, Everton at 16th, Ipswich Town sitting at 17th, just barely outside the relegation zone. Relegation zone being Crystal Palace, Wolves, and Southampton. Crystal Palace, I like them. They're a team that, they've been in the Premier League for 10 years now after they were down in the depths of the championship in 2010. And they fought their way back. They almost were relegated out of the championship in 2010, but then they fought their way back, and within 3 seasons got themselves promoted to the Premier League. Have finished as high as, I believe, 9th, if I'm not mistaken. And then obviously Wolves in 19th, Southampton in 10th. Wolves is another team where it's like they fought their way in the Premier League. They fought their way in the Premier League. They got relegated from the Premier League in 2011. Kind of they bounced around the championship. They fell as far as League One in 2013-14. Then they bounced around the championship, won the championship, and they've been up in the Premier League ever since the 18-19 season, finishing as high as 7th in 1920 in the 1920 season, 1920 as in 2019-2020. And now they're sitting at 19th. I do think they'll turn their season around, and relegation will slide more towards Southampton, Ipswich, and possibly Leicester, but you never know. In terms of the remaining matches, at least in this calendar year for Chelsea, before the new year and leading up to Boxing Day, Chelsea's got several matchups. Like I said, Leicester City, I think they'll handle business, but I think they might be kind of a 1-0, 2-1 affair. I think Chelsea's kind of got that. Then Conference League matchup next Thursday on Thanksgiving, they play FC Heidenheim out of Germany. I think they're kind of a mid-table team out of Germany, but that's what the Conference League's meant for. Then Chelsea will take on Aston Villa at home, Southampton on the road. Then they will take the London Derby at home, on the road on December 9th against Tottenham. Then from there, they'll play host to Brentford. Then they'll be on the road Everton, host to Fulham for another London Derby. And then to round out 2024 Chelsea will travel to Ipswich, England to take on Ipswich Town. And that will be the final game of the 2024 calendar year. But then they'll start off 2025 strong against Crystal Palace, and then 10 days later with a game against Bournemouth. I think this is a pretty, I don't want to say easy, but this certainly isn't the most strenuous stretch of the season for Chelsea. And I think this could be the time for Chelsea to rack up some wins, boost that goal difference, put some points in their pocket to when they go into that absolute just grueling finish of a season. Chelsea does play Man City at the end of January, but Chelsea doesn't really have a really strenuous stretch of the Premier League until they get to like that late April, early May. Late April, they've got Arsenal, they've got Brentford on the road, which can be tough. Fulham on the road, which while Fulham isn't what they once were, I mean, Fulham is still in the top 10 and, fierce rival of Chelsea, so that's going to be a tough one. Then Chelsea have Liverpool, Newcastle, and Man United and Nottingham Forest, all just straight to finish out the season, which that could be a dangerous finish to the season for us. But, I think it's important we take it one step at a time. And, we really, pick up these wins in the games we should have, like the games I mentioned, particularly these Premier League games to, finish out the remainder of 2024. Aston Villa may be a difficult one. Aston Villa, another kind of London rivalry team. I mean, they're sitting in ninth. While they're in ninth, we're only 1 point clear of them. This, the race for the top 10 in the Premier League is highly contested. Only first is separated from 10th by 12 points, but second and 10th are separated by the 7. Second or third and 10th are separated by 3. So this is a really tight race where everyone matters. And like I said, kind of easier, if you will, this kind of easier path right now for Chelsea. It's critical they pick up wins. And I think not only Aston Villa being in the Champions League, but also the FA, still in the FA Cup, I believe, will give kind of Chelsea the edge where they're going to kind of have to, kind of play like a zone coverage and kind of rest their players, not able to go completely 100% into one game. And then down the stretch, I will highlight some of Chelsea's Conference League group stage games. Chelsea play against Heidenheim, then Astana. Astana, I believe they're a Kazakhstani team. Yeah, let me check. Yeah, they're a Kazakhstani team. Play against a Kazakhstani team, and then to finish out, I believe the league phase of the Conference League, Chelsea play the Shamrock Rovers out of Ireland. Not too worried about Chelsea in the Conference League. We currently in the new league format for the Conference League. So unlike previous years, the Conference League, Champions League, excuse me, and the Europa League have gone to an actual league format, upgrading from 32 teams to 36. And Chelsea is currently sitting atop of that league format with 3 wins and a goal difference of 13, meaning we've scored 6 and let in 3. And a lot of that came in part to our win over the Armenian team FC Noho, where we absolutely thrashed them 8-0. But, I hate saying that because, I like these these smaller clubs. They're fun to learn about, just the history behind them and just the names, the jerseys. And it's like, I always love hearing about the smaller leagues and the smaller teams. One team I'm surprised is not doing better in the Europa Conference League is I've got a few. The Greek giant Panathinaikos. I'm a little surprised we haven't seen them as high up on this list, but my expertise isn't in the Greek league, and who knows? I mean, yeah, they're sitting in 5th in the Greek league, but yeah, that's also the Greek league. I mean, elsewhere in the Conference League, let me just take a quick look again. It's not what I was looking at. Conference League, other teams that are not doing as well, I would have expected a little more out of FC Copenhagen, especially after being in the Champions League last year. I know they've lost some players, but last year they had a decent run in the Champions League. Not a long run, but, they gave some teams a run for their money. Real Betis, another one. Real Betis sitting on 4 points with a win, draw, and a loss. Yeah, it's it's certainly interesting. But I'm happy with where Chelsea's at. And like I said, the most important thing to me right now is obviously the Conference League's going to bring in money, but money is not something Chelsea's in big need of right now. I think what we need is we needed a year where we've had some decent success in the Premier League because the last few years, finishing sixth and like around there. Well, that is top. That's like considered top, almost 25% of the league. That's just not who I don't think that's where we need to be shooting for as Chelsea is. But for right now, Chelsea's going into, I'd say, a favorable stretch. I don't want to say easy. Easy is not the right word because there's no easy games in the Premier League. But I feel like they're going into a favorable stretch of the season where if they can really capitalize, they can, get some points in their pocket where, if they slip up against, say like a Man City at the Etihad, or like they have just a disaster of a game against Arsenal and the Emirates. Like they've got a game, they can rack up points and have those in their back pockets while these other teams, I don't know specifically if they're having a hard schedule, but if Chelsea can at least match what those teams do against, or what, the Liverpools, Man City, the Arsenal, do against the mid-table teams, they can at least match, they'll keep pace. And like I said, if they're playing, tough teams, this could be a good point. Like I said, not just, stock up on games and points and wins, but, get that goal difference up because goal difference is what's keeping us out of fifth right now. We're sitting at third. Goal difference is what's separating us from Arsenal and Nottingham Forest. And, no shade at Nottingham Forest. Like I said, sleeping giant. So they're like Ajax. They're asleep. Ajax, for those you don't know, Ajax is a Dutch soccer team from the Netherlands who has a dominant history when it comes to the European tournament, where Champions League, which is where all the best teams in Europe, the top 4 teams in each European league compete. Sometimes if your league's good enough, you get 5 or 6, but usually you only get 4 spots for your top 4 teams. Ajax has a lot of tournament wins, and they've won that tournament on several occasions. But Ajax still win the Dutch league a lot, but they're not the giant they were, and that's similar to Nottingham Forest, sleeping giants. Same thing with Newcastle. I mean, Newcastle's kind of made its way back. Aston Villa, another team that's kind of a sleeping giant that's made its way back. So I think that'll do it for the soccer section. And just, I think, quite frankly, for the episode, I mean, Aiden and I had a lot going on this week, so this is going to be a shorter episode, only probably about hour 40 as opposed to our normal 2.5. But Aiden's sick, and he's got to get the boon. And, I've got trying to catch up on rest after working 2 swim meets in a row. We're going to try and get into more of a consistent uploading schedule as the college football season winds down, and not just because it's ending, but, we're going to be going into college basketball season where there's games 2-3 times a week, and we're really just trying to get our schedule down and get into a rhythm. And, hopefully we'll get more consistent with these and better about the episodes and, more consistent episode format, not just kind of, popcorn hodgepodge of it. This is a learning process for all of us. Aiden and I are still kind of, working out the kinks, but it's been fun. Thanks for listening in. We're still working on that college basketball episode. That one is actually quite long because we highlight every single conference. So that'll be a long one. Aiden and I are still working on editing that. It's started out at around 3 hours long. We've whittled it down to about 2.5 for you guys. So that should be coming out soon, so expect that. And from us here at Tobacco Road and Abroad tonight, thank you for listening in, and see you next week.